Hello again, and welcome back to Introduction to Philosophy. My setup, just so you kind of know, is that I've got another screen over here, and so my eyes are going to be going back and forth. It's hard for me to think about camera and not look at myself. If you've ever done any kind of web camera stuff before, I've not done a lot of it, so I'm not very well versed in trying to keep my eyes in the right place, and besides, I'm going to have to be looking at my notes over here. So I'm not going to be making eye contact with the camera 100% of the time, just so you know. And I tend to look around while I teach, and the reason that I do that is because I'm thinking, and so I'm not actually seeing with my eyes, I'm seeing with my mind's eyes, and so I won't be making eye contact with the camera as much as I like to make eye contact with my students. Just kind of so you know, that's the setup. If it's a little disconcerting because I'm always looking around, I don't realize how much my eyes bounce around until I watch myself on camera. But talking about philosophy and an introduction to an introduction class on philosophy, I usually begin by asking my students, what do they think of when they hear the word philosophy? What is it that comes into your mind? And I get a wide range of answers, anything from ancient scrolls or just ideas. The most often answer that I get is old guys with beards. And so I'm rapidly becoming the embodiment of philosophy as an old guy with a beard. But lots of different variations, lots of different ideas about what philosophy is, what it means, especially for people who maybe have never studied any kind of philosophy. We don't offer it in high school, and so maybe you're going to be hearing lots of new stuff for the first time. Certainly, as I said earlier, there are going to be a lot of new terms. There's going to be a lot of terms that you've probably never heard before, and so you'll have to kind of gear up and learn new pieces of language, and I would encourage you to take notes. And so when I say something like utilitarianism, and then I try to define it for you, go ahead and write it down. If you don't know what utilitarianism is, go ahead and write it down and try to start trying to get the terms as quickly as possible. It'll make it easier for you to watch the videos and take the quizzes and move along really, really quickly. And certainly in the other videos and the other assignments that we've got online, there's going to be a lot of repetition. So you should get the terms pretty quickly, but it always helps to get those as quickly as possible. The second question I like to ask my students is, what puzzles you about philosophy? And again, a massive variety of answers. The one that I certainly get the most often is everything. And the reason they say everything is because they don't know anything about philosophy. That's not unusual. And I'll kind of start with the assumption that you know nothing about this topic. It's an introductory course, which means I kind of have to start there. I have to assume that you have no idea about anything about philosophy. So, quickly, a bit of a definition for philosophy. The activity of philosophy, or the definition of philosophy, it comes from the Greek words, two words put together, and translated literally it means the love of wisdom. And so the Greeks, as they're developing philosophy, as they're inventing it for all intents and purposes, they're searching for what the most fundamental aspect of reality is. Now, when you start thinking about the word fundamental, what does that mean? Well, I played basketball when I was in high school, and so the fundamentals of basketball are things like dribbling and passing, and so you have to find the most basic, and I think probably the best word here is the most foundational concept, right? And so if you're going to build a building, you have to have a very, very firm foundation. Otherwise, the whole thing is just going to collapse and it's going to fall. So in your thinking, when you're thinking about philosophy and you're looking for the most fundamental, you're looking for the most basic, you're looking for the most foundational aspect of thinking. And so you need to have a good, strong foundation for your thinking. And that's part of what philosophy is doing. You're looking for a good, strong foundation that can support the rest of your thoughts. And just like that building needs a strong foundation, your thinking needs a strong foundation. So what's the most fundamental? What's the most basic? What's the most foundational thinking that we can have? Philosophy, as I said, it does come from two Greek words. The first one is Philo, and the second one is Sophia. It's interesting because that first word, Philo, is masculine, It's the word for love, and a familial kind of love in this case, meaning the love of family. And then Sophia is a feminine word, and it literally means wisdom. And so in this case, studying philosophy means that you are someone who loves wisdom and you're pursuing it as someone who does in fact love wisdom. Philo does mean love, but it means brotherly love or a familial or a family sense of love. If you've ever, if you know of the city Philadelphia, that Philo is love, and then the Delphia is for city. And so in this case, it means literally, it translates, the name Philadelphia translates literally as the city of brotherly love, right? Now, I've been to Philadelphia. I'm not sure how true that is, but in this case, Philadelphia just means a brotherly city type of love. These individuals should be loving each other like they are brothers. And so Philo means a brotherly type of love. It is a love comprised of dedication to a relationship or task, and it does not necessarily involve feeling or passion in the sense of, say, arete. Arete is that kind of love that you would have towards your significant other, towards your spouse, towards your lover. And so in this case, it's the love of family. The word Sophia does mean wisdom. It is feminine. Wisdom is typically thought of as being an understanding of elemental principles and of unchanging truths. Now, when we talk about wisdom, there's a difference in knowledge and wisdom. Knowledge means that you have the information. You know these things over here. You can be a very knowledgeable person, but not necessarily be a wise person, because wisdom means that you're applying the knowledge that you have. So you can't just know the facts, you also have to be applying the facts well. And so wisdom, the idea of finding wisdom is that you're looking for elemental principles and you're looking for unchanging truths. Now, the unchanging truths here is really, really important. Why would we be looking for unchanging truths? Well, you don't want your foundation to change. If your foundation on your house starts changing, you're in trouble. And so the same idea here applies to thinking. You don't want to have ideas that are constantly changing. You want to have a foundation of thought, a foundation of thinking, that is in place and it's secure and it's going to stay the same. And so when you're looking for wisdom, can we find any knowledge? Can we find, do we have any way of coming to understand something so that we know that this truth does not change? Now, we live in a culture that's postmodern. I know there's a lot of subjectivity in the way our culture thinks, and there's some in mine. I was once I once believed that everything was subjective as well. After studying philosophy, I came to the conclusion that not everything is subjective, and we'll talk a lot about that. I don't want to jump too far ahead, but just for now, let me kind of give you an example of what I mean. Are there some truths that don't change? So kind of an example, and I'm going to go in a little bit of a circle, but you'll see with the point when I get to the end of it. During the Inquisition, it was common to burn witches. Now, today we don't burn witches, at least not that I know of. We haven't had a good old-fashioned witch burning in a very, very long time. To my knowledge, we don't burn witches. But was there any kind of fundamental underlying truth about why we burned witches? And if you think about the less Halloween-y type idea, and you start thinking about what people thought witches were in the medieval period, these were individuals, usually females, but these were individuals who sold their soul to the devil for some kind of power, and they could, steal your children and eat them, or steal your soul, or curse your cattle. I mean, there were lots of different things that witches might be accused of doing. And so why were they burning witches? And especially it's true when you start thinking about our fairy tales like Hansel and Gretel, and you start thinking about that witches preyed upon the innocent. They preyed upon the innocent. And one of the fundamental underlying, I'm going to say moral truths in this case, is that we protect the innocent. Now, we don't burn witches today, but we still protect the innocent. That's a fundamental underlying truth that doesn't change. We protect the innocent. We used to burn witches to protect the innocent. We no longer burn witches. That changed. But the fundamental underlying principle that did not change was that we protect the innocent. Now, if that is a fundamental underlying principle, and I'm not saying it is, we haven't really proven that it is or that it isn't, but let's just say, for example, that maybe that's one that should remain the same. We should always protect the innocent. Well, now we've got a fundamental underlying principle, and it's true, and it doesn't change. And so that's what the ancient Greeks are looking for. They're looking for those types of principles that are fundamental, they're basic, they are foundational, and they'll remain in place. So philosophy is also, we're looking for those principles, but we're also undergoing the attempt to provide for oneself an outlook on life that allows us to discover broad fundamental principles. That's where we're going to be starting, and hopefully you'll be able to apply these things to your life as well. So it won't just be, me trying to give you some philosophical or logical, truth, and then big deal. Hopefully it's something that we can take and apply to our lives. And so again, hopefully you'll be able to apply to yourself. We always protect the innocent. I think that would be a good fundamental truth for us to apply to our lives. But those are the kinds of things that we're going to be looking for. We're not going to start there. We're going to start with something even more basic than that, because before we can start talking about those fundamental underlying truths, we're going to have to do a little bit of logic in here as well. So we'll get to that eventually, but hopefully that's what we're going to get to, like I say, on down the road. In philosophy, we're going to be doing rational reflection. Now, what do we mean by the word rational reflection? Rational reflection really just is thinking hard, and that's not very technically exciting. It sounds kind of common, actually, which I'm actually quite happy with. We'll get plenty of technical later on. Rational reflection really just is thinking hard. But in philosophy, we're not trying to discover empirical data. Right now, he's used a word, hasn't he? The word is empirical. And so kind of just a basic definition, and here we go with terms, right? So go ahead and write this down. Empirical data, if something is empirically perceivable, that means that you can learn the information, you can perceive with your five senses. That's what we mean when we say something is empirical. Or if I say something is, if it's empirical data, that means it's information you gained using one of your five senses. And so you saw it, you tasted it, you smelt it, you heard it, or you felt it. There's going to be something in there that your five senses are going to have to be involved. This is really, really going to matter a lot as we go through this. Through the semester, we're going to talk a lot about empiricism, right? And so it has nothing to do with an empire, and it has everything to do with being able to sense it using your five senses. So it's empirical. Quick spelling on that, just so you know, I write this stuff on the board in my classroom, but just so you know, empirical is E-M-P-I-R-I-C-A-L, empirical. That way you can know, if you want to look it up, and as you're taking notes, you can spell it correctly as well. All right, so rational reflection is thinking hard, but we're not out necessarily to discover empirical data. That's not what we're about. The sciences gather empirical information. So if you're interested in gathering empirical information, go into biology or go into zoology or something like that. They're the ones that are going out and performing experiments in a laboratory, and they're using their five senses to collect information. We're not going to be doing that. We're a different kind of science. Philosophy, instead, it covers things like metaphysics, epistemology, logic, and ethics. And those are things that we certainly use our five senses to try to gather some of this information that's going to help us think about these different topics. But you can't know ethics, for example, and you can't know the right thing to do or not to do simply based on sight. There's more to moral thinking, to ethical thinking, than looking at a situation. Certainly looking at a situation to see if someone is being harmed is going to be very, very important for moral thinking, but there's got to be something more behind it than just someone's being harmed. Because I take my children to the dentist and they experience pain, but that doesn't mean it's immoral. And so there's more to it than just what we can see, hear, smell, taste, and feel. So in philosophy, we're going to be delving into those other areas. As I said, metaphysics, and we'll talk more about what metaphysics is later on, and also epistemology. I'll explain that later. Logic and ethics as well, right? So there's a lot more to it. It's not the physical science. There's a reason the physical sciences are over here, and then there's a reason that philosophy and ethics and logic and these others are over here. And so we're going to be dealing less with the empirical data, stuff you can get through your five senses. We're going to be dealing more with rational, the mind itself, and how we can know if we're right, and then also what we do with that information once we do know that we are right as well. Now, there's what's called a normative function of philosophy. Normative means that, unlike other disciplines, philosophy tries to distinguish in very broad ways what is from what ought to be. Now, this is going to be a very, very important distinction for us. There's a very important phrase in philosophy that says you can't get an ought from an is. And what that means is that just because something is this way, you can't know that it ought be this way or that it ought not be that way. If you look around the world and you see that there's a child that's being abused, you can know that that is what's happening, but you can't know what ought to or ought not happen simply by what is happening. An ought demands that there's something else going on. There's got to be more to it than just this is the case. You're going to have to figure out the reason. You're going to have to think through the different logical steps to get us to the place where we say, and it shouldn't be that way. Children shouldn't be abused. And here's why. And so you have to move further along than just this is what it is to why. Why ought it be this way or ought not be this way? And the normative function in philosophy means that we're going to be interested in finding the best of things. We're going to be interested in finding the best kind of art. We're not going to do a lot with art, but that's one of the main goals. It's called aesthetics. And so in that particular philosophy of beauty, it's really important that you come to understand what makes something beautiful, what makes something more special than other things. Because my musical capabilities and the musical capabilities of, say, Beethoven are very, very different. It's what makes his better than mine, and there's a whole philosophy that deals in that, and that's the normative function. We're going to be looking for what makes the best kind of morality, or we're going to be looking for what makes the best kind of education, government. That's the normative function of philosophy, looking for the best. Here's what, if in a perfect world, here's what the best government might look like. And we'll talk about trying to understand that search. We won't necessarily come in and settle on, and this is the best government or the best educational model. It's just to say that that's what philosophy is looking for. In a perfect world, what would the best ... look like? Education, government. Also, it's the function of philosophy, just meaning that once you get those fundamental underlying principles, now hopefully you'll be able to act. You'll be able to act on those principles and get that normative function of philosophy going. The subject matter of philosophy can be everything. Philosophers, I like to say, are really, really greedy. They want to discuss it all. I mean, if you're looking for the best model of anything, and in a philosopher's case, of everything, there's a philosophy behind all of it. And so philosophy kind of consumes the world. It kind of wants to talk about every aspect of the world. And so the subject matter of philosophy is not it's not like zoology where you're discussing animals. It's much, much broader, and in fact philosophy takes in zoology. We'll talk about animals and humans and what makes us different from the rest of the creatures that inhabit this planet. And so philosophy is greedy. The subject matter is all-encompassing. Constructive or analytical philosophy, that just means that it's an attempt to find answers to the most basic and most important questions, and you're looking to find those through rational thought. And so if you ask the question, why am I here? What's my purpose? You're not going to be able to find your purpose under a microscope. That's something that does not have physical extension, meaning that you can't, experience it through your five senses. Meaning and purpose is going to be something that you find by using your rational thinking. Now, you may use your five senses to discover your purpose, but primarily you're going to have to use rational thinking. You're going to have to use your own thought processes to figure out a question like that. You're not going to, cut yourself open and take a bit of blood or a bit of tissue out, put it under the microscope, examine it, and then say, well, my purpose is ... because look, I have such and such cellular structure. It's nothing you can find that way. And so using analytical philosophy, we'll try to answer some of the big questions in our lives. We're going to focus on constructing a total worldview. And what do I mean when I say a total worldview? A worldview really just is how you view the world. And I've used the same words to now define the thing I'm trying to define, which is generally a bad idea. But a worldview really just is the way you see the world. If you've ever heard the phrase that you're looking at the world through rose-colored glasses. Now, rose-colored glasses, that's somebody who is very, very optimistic. Everything seems rosy to them, pleasant, wonderful, smells sweet, tastes sweet, life's great. That's how they see the world. When we say they have rose-colored glasses, if you've ever put on any type of shades or shaded glasses, it tints the world. It makes it look darker or rosy, or I remember having some green glasses, and so it made the world have a tint of green to it. Well, that's what a worldview is. That's what a worldview does. It's the way you see the world. If you're optimistic and you see the world as basically good, or pessimistic and you see the world as basically chaotic and perhaps bad, always expecting bad things to happen, that's your view of the world. That's a worldview. Now, worldview is much, much more complicated, and it's made more complicated the further you get into it. And so, for example, and we're not going to answer the question of the existence of God in this particular video for certain, but if you're someone who believes in God, then your worldview is somewhat theistic, meaning that you think there is a divine being that's out there. Now, there's different versions of that particular position. You might think there is one, but that God's not paying any attention. Or you might think that there is a God, and God is intimately involved in the lives of every person on the planet. Those are two different worldviews within the theistic model of understanding, right? So you think there's a God. One thinks, if you think there's a God and you think God's not paying attention, that's one worldview. And so that's going to affect how you behave throughout your life, because your worldview is those glasses that you've got on are telling you that, yeah, there's a God, but God's not paying any attention. You're going to act differently. You're going to look at the world differently. You're going to think differently about the world if you believe that there's a God and that God does genuinely care about every human on the planet. That's going to be a different worldview. And so you're going to see the world differently. You're going to behave differently. You're going to expect others to behave differently because this is your worldview. If you're an atheist and you don't think that there is a God, then that's going to affect the way you view the world. It's going to affect the way you behave. I didn't say atheists can't be good people. What I'm saying is that if you think there's a God, these things are going to, you're going to think these things are true. And if you think there's not a God, then you're going to think these things are true. Your worldview, your belief about a deity, is massively going to affect the way you see the world. The same is true in politics. And I certainly don't want to answer the question of conservatives and liberals, and it's not something that we're really going to go into. This is not a political science class. But your particular political views affect the way you see the world. What you think about big business, what you think about big money, what you think about the different political candidates and their backgrounds, all of this stuff is going to be affected by your basic understanding of the world and the way the world either works or doesn't work, I suppose. So your worldview, your most basic, your most fundamental ideas of how you think the world behaves, those things all together, and like I say, it's not just this or that. It's going to be, part of it's going to be personality, part of it's going to be your upbringing, part of it's going to be your social climate, part of it's going to be your economic climate, Some of it's going to have to do with your views on religion, your views on politics. All of these things, when you bring all of them together, and the way you see the world, that is your worldview. Now, some people's worldviews are better than others. Now, right away, that's going to be somewhat controversial, but let me put it to you this way. There is a flat earth society in England and one in California. Some people's view of the world, literally in that case, the shape of the earth, some people's are better than others. It's just simply the case. The earth is not flat. We have multiple tests. We have multiple ways of knowing that the earth is, in fact, it's not really quite a sphere, but I'm just going to say a sphere. The earth is round. It's a sphere. You point your ship in one direction and sail, you'll come out back at the same port. And just point your ship east and a little south, I guess, every now and then, and you'll sail all the way around the world. It has to be round. We've got pictures from outer space. The world has to be round. Some people's understanding is better than others. We also, it's easy to pick on somebody like the Nazis, and so I'll join the crowd and pick on the Nazis. Some people's view of the world is better than others. The Nazis had a very, very bad view of the world. If you think that your race makes you superior to other people, more valuable, and so that somehow you can abuse other people because they're of a different race, your view of the world it's not as good as other people's. Some ideas are wrong. All humanity is basically equal in their value. Now, some of us are better at putting a basketball through a hoop, and so not everybody's equal in all aspects, but all of us have the same value as a human being. And so that's what I mean when I say all humans are equal. They're equal in value, regardless of the continent that they came from, regardless of their ancestry. It makes no difference. Some ideas about the world are better than others, and it's really important that we know this and that we accept this. Now, there are some views of the world that are subjective. My little stepdaughter will not touch a vegetable, never mind eating the thing, right? That's subjective. That has nothing to do with truth or the value of humanity. That's something completely other than what we're talking about. So some things in the world are subjective, but there are some things that, well, some ideas are not as good as others. The earth is not flat. All humans have the same kind of value. Racism is wrong. It just is. And so some ideas are better than others. Figuring out which ideas are better or figuring out which ideas are weaker or worse can be a real trick, and it can be a really, really difficult thing to do for certain. But how you come at these questions will largely depend on your worldview. It will largely depend on the ideas, the concepts that you walk into the classroom with. In the first video I did, hopefully, challenge you a little bit to be able to change your mind, to be free to change your mind. Maybe you'll be going through this class and suddenly you'll realize that, you know, I used to think this, but now I think I was wrong about that, and now I think this. I've done it a number of times about a number of issues. It's always a struggle. It's always a difficult thing to do, but it's always worth it. So when it comes to a worldview, you know, it's that preconceived notions that you're coming to this class with, and we'll try to test our preconceived notions and make sure which ones are good, which ones are bad, which ones we should keep, which ones we perhaps should let go. All of that is going to be part of what we're going to be doing in a philosophy class as well. A big part of philosophy class is going to be defining terms as well. We won't focus on this quite as much because this is an introduction class, but certainly there'll be some of this. So what do I mean when I say we have to define our terms? Well, how do we define murder? And when we get to philosophy of morality, when we get to ethics, it's going to be an important question. How do we define murder? It's got to be more than just deliberate killing, because deliberately killing another human being is something that soldiers do in wartime, but when they come home, we don't hold them up as murderers. In fact, often we hold them up as heroes. And so it's not adequate to just say the deliberate killing of another human being is murder. That's not quite enough, and so we'll have to be more specific. The deliberate killing of another human being could also happen, say, in a case of self-defense. If somebody breaks into your home and you use lethal force on that individual, that's called a castle law defense, and so you defended yourself based on the fact that they break in with the intention of doing harm. We don't hold you up as a murderer, and so we have to adequately define exactly what it means to murder someone. Executioners, we don't hold them up as murderers. It's if you execute a murderer, if you literally execute someone who has deliberately taken an innocent life, then you're an executioner, you're not a murderer. I understand that there's some political ramifications there as well, but that's exactly what I mean. If you think that they are murderers, and if you think that a society who executes murderers, that they are in fact themselves murderers, what you've done is you've created some type of tension within the definition. So how do we define exactly what it means for someone to be a murderer versus someone to be, say in that case, an executioner? Are executioners murderers? And a lot of that depends on how you define the term. And so we have to come up with definitions that are adequate, that will let us understand one another, and then also be functional. We can move forward with those as well. So that's going to be a part of our philosophy class also. A little bit quickly here as an ending, how philosophy behaves. Philosophy is, therefore, probably best characterized as a rational examination or critique of the most basic elements of our everyday experiences and beliefs. I'll say that again. Philosophy is therefore probably best characterized as a rational examination. Remember, we have to use logic. We have to begin to think about what we think. Why do we think what we think? So it's the rational examination, and it's a critique. And a critique in this case is not negative, it's positive, in that we're taking it and we're looking at it to see if it holds up. If you critique a foundation to see if it can support a structure, if it can support a building, that's a good thing. And so we're going to be critiquing, using rational examination, our most basic beliefs, our fundamental beliefs. Philosophy can't really teach us anything new in the material sense. That is to say, in the sense of empiricism. Again, it's not one of the physical sciences. It's not looking to teach you something in that regard, in that aspect. It can clarify what we already know, and it's not going to take anything for granted. There's got to be some kind of evidence. There's got to be some kind of proof. We're not going to come in with preconceived notions and just assume our preconceived notions are true. We want to examine those preconceived notions. They're usually our most basic, our most fundamental, our most foundational understanding of the world. And so we're going to come in, we're going to critique that in a very positive way, critique our fundamental, our foundational thinking. We'll critique that in a positive way and try to see if it can actually hold the weight of the rest of our thinking. So that's kind of where we're headed. I know that's a lot to digest, to take in, and to take it in quickly. But just so you know, it is about trying to find that fundamental, the most basic thoughts, the most basic ideas that we can then put other thinking and other thoughts on top of. And then what we'll see eventually is that once you get that foundation of thinking, then you can start moving up into the normative, to those actions, to where your foundation allows you to act and behave in the world. If you have a good foundation of thinking, if your thinking is right, if your foundational thinking is right and true, then your values are going to be good values. You're going to value good things. And then your actions ultimately are also going to be good actions. You can think of this like an iceberg. And usually I have a little, I have my dry erase board in the classroom, and I draw a picture of an iceberg. And I like to tell my students, you can only see 10% of the iceberg. You can just see the tip. You can just see what's right on top. I'm sorry about my dog. You can just see what's right on top of the iceberg. You can't see what's underneath it, but that's what's holding the tip of the iceberg up, is all that foundation. And so you have to have good thinking. You have to have good foundational thinking so that in the middle you have good values, and at the top, what you can see, you have good actions. Because when you think about humanity, you can only see their actions. You can't see their foundational thinking. You can only see their actions. You can only see the tip of that iceberg, that 10%. So back to the Nazis, I can kind of hopefully make this iceberg thing make sense to you, right? The Nazis had some bad thinking. One of their bad bits of thinking was that Jews were less valuable, that they were less human than the Aryan race, than the Germans, than the Austrians. So they had bad thinking at the foundational level, which means they had bad value in the middle. Bad value meaning that they didn't value the lives of the Jews as human. And since they didn't value them as being fully human, then they could act in very, very atrocious ways towards these individuals, and to them, in their minds, they thought that that was morally not only acceptable, but it was the right way to behave. Why? Because their foundational thinking was bad. Bad foundation, bad values, bad actions. Now, if you have good foundational thinking, and you think that all humans have basically the same human value, the same amount of value, then you'll value all humans equally, no matter their race, no matter their religion, no matter their economic status, no matter anything. All humans have the same value. So if you have that kind of foundational thinking, you value all humans equally, and then you treat all humans equally. You have good actions. So bad thinking on the bottom means bad values. That means bad actions. Good foundational thinking means good values and then good actions. And so trying to find good foundational thinking that's logical, it's rational, something that we can have that's more than just I like this or I don't like this. There has to be more to it than that. We're going to be looking for that kind of fundamental underlying principle in thinking that will allow us to have good values and therefore will allow us to have good actions. Now, the good actions are not just moral in this case. In the case of the Nazis, those are moral activities. But if you have good thinking and you have good values, you're also going to have good actions in your own personal life, which means that you have a better shot at living a good life. Again, what's a good life look like? We'll address that further towards the end. But part of philosophy, looking for good values, looking for good thinking so that we can have good actions and therefore we can have good lives as well. Like I said, it's quite a bit to take in on our first lecture, introduction, but hopefully this makes sense. Hopefully you'll understand a little bit about what philosophy is. It's the idea of we're searching for wisdom, we're searching for the most fundamental underlying values, that foundational thinking that we can take and use so that we have good actions, we can have good lives, we can make good moral decisions. All of these things, hopefully, as we move through. What we're going to do is we're going to look at a lot of different people's thinking in the past. We're going to look at some of the ancient Greeks first. We're going to go chronologically in order. So we'll start with the ancient Greeks and we'll move up to modern times and just kind of see, we're going to look at a lot of the great thinkers and how they understood the world and what they said was the most basic fundamental underlying the foundation of thinking. We'll look at a lot of great thinkers, because if you've got really, really intelligent people and they've had these thoughts before you, you don't have to figure all that stuff out for yourself. We can just go study them, we'll know what they think, and then that'll help us think about our own thinking and we can make up our own minds from there. So starting in the next few lectures, we'll start looking at proper thinking, and then we'll also start looking at some of the great thinkers and what they thought, what they believed. Looking forward to it. Again, if you have any questions about any of the content of the lecture, but also anything in the class that you just can't quite figure out, certainly shoot me an email, and I'll look forward to hearing from you.